United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Recording in progress.
Well, good morning. We're here to continue our discussions on two Nexamp projects in the town of Watertown on Floral Drive. And this is to go over once again the cost benefit calculations and formalize what type of pilot agreement we're going to offer the developer. And at this time, David, I'll turn it to you and Lyle to go over the newest calculator.
Sure. So you see Lyle recalculated this where we basically totaled the charge our per megawatt fee to the per megawatt of generation capacity as well as the per megawatt of storage capacity. So 3.5 megawatts output generation, 2.85 megawatts of battery storage capacity. So basically did this at 5,500 per megawatt for the 6.35 megawatts total. So you'll see there the proposed pilot payment schedule, what it looks like now compared to what we had before. Where we were just estimating the generation capacity. And just we were talking here at the beginning of the meeting, figuring out how this works. So they getting like doing 6.35 megawatts per day, or is it is it additional revenue they're making? Is it more of an incremental increase, or what are we seeing? What have you seen elsewhere where they've had battery storage on these things?
Well, from our perspective, the analysis isn't really how many times they turn on the batteries, or they're asked to deplete them into the system. They're putting in an additional, with respect to battery, $4.3 million of improvements that we're being asked to accept under the pilot agreement.
All right. Yeah.
What is our 40 per megawatt charge for that is the question. Storage projects that we're working on, or we've seen across the state that have negotiated per megawatt charges associated with just the battery itself, without any production questions. So there's a lot of projects that are combined like this one. So you're being asked to exempt two different kinds of ratables, significant cost. There's a lot of uncertainty in the industry as to how those things are being assessed right now, but the state formula that we've been tackling and grappling with for a year and a half is now held up. So the question boils down to is, what would this assessor do with it? I'm not sure that, and looking at the sheets, I appreciate you sending that over. There's an assumption here that this $11 million combined project be assessed at $1.4 million, which I'm kind of struggling with based on the old rule of thumb of somewhere near $1 million a megawatt, and we have 6.35 megawatts. Even if you temper that a bit, you're going to land maybe somewhere around 4 or 5 million. So anyway, it's hard. We're kind of shooting darts at a horse here a little bit in the absence of a firm assessment calculation. So the reason I bring that up is the new math here and the new schedule that Lyle generated at 6.35 megawatts, with the assumption that this thing is less than $1.5 million assessed, seems to suggest that the pilot payment is going to be more than full taxes when you invert the schedule under your factor. At least in the first year, anyway, which I think that might be a little misleading. I would take a look at perhaps a more robust total project assessment. And I mentioned in an email back to you a few minutes ago that the land assessment, we need to continue, I think, to refine that a little bit. We have an assumption here that 20 acres of commercial land is going to be generating $150 in taxes.
Now, is that based on the current assessment, the 150?
Yeah.
So we could make, we should do it.
The land hasn't been a problem. We know that. One assessor says it should be assessed at $10,000 an acre, but all I can use is an average because we have no other methodology available.
Roger Tibbetts, who does the town of Watertown, I think is using closer to 15 an acre
Is it? Oh.
for the
Yeah.
projects
Well,
down in
it's
Adams.
It's no longer farmland. It makes sense. But
So maybe we should figure 15,000 an acre for the land value and recalculate it
I can
per
do it.
acre.
15,000.
I'll talk to Roger today if he's in and see if we can figure out. If that number changes, I'll let you know.
Okay.
Assumption, even if your assumption is off, I mean, it's okay, but we know that it's not gonna be agricultural, we know it's not gonna be $150. At the end of the day, when this is restructured with an assumption like that, it's a bit of a push. Because the UTAP says you're gonna pay full taxes on the land, and that's gonna drive through to be a component of the payment. So it's really not gonna affect the financial assistance analysis, because it's a push.
Right.
When you put $150 in here, it's suggesting that you're gonna freeze it and give them that benefit. So I don't wanna have that.
Yeah.
Because we're not freezing at agricultural rate, under the UTEP. So a good step forward, getting a blended UTEP analysis put together for combined battery and generation facilities.
By changing our calculation to include battery storage, does this make this a deviation? Anything we're doing under our UTEP?
No, because our UTEP I went back and looked at it, I think I may have even added a quote in one of our things, but basically it's per megawatt capacity for renewable energy projects. So I think battery storage renewable energy project has 2.85 megawatts capacity. We're not distinguishing our UTEP between generation.
But our UTEP goes to 20 anything less than 20 megawatts. So, okay, so we're not pushing this into a deviation.
Yeah, they have to go over the 20 to
Yeah.
be a deviation
Okay.
of 20 or more.
We've had a pretty broad definition of renewable energy facilities, which captures, wind, solar, biogas, anything, right? This is just a different kind or an additional kind of solar. And batteries could be stuck on wind as well, where that's not uncommon as well.
Justin, you mentioned the cost of the battery storage. Where did you derive that from? Was that in something? Because I didn't see a number for cost.
Then the application has a breakdown of battery and generation equipment. Just on the North project, which Dave circulated the summary around to me, it's a total of about 11.2 million total project cost, of which it's about 6 in generation and a little bit over 4 in battery storage. So that rateable, and as small as it is, I mean, there are these Tesla little bricks that they throw out there. I use little tongue in cheek, but they're big things, but it looked like there were 2 or 3 per array. So they must cost, $1.5 million each, something like that, probably $1 million too.
Thanks.
Yeah, we had the breakout on page 12 for the project cost. Shows the battery storage.
I'm just thinking here. One of the things that I'm struggling with is understanding this type of operation it is to relieve the pressure on a substation and the cooperative effort with National Grid and how this benefits each party financially. So I guess today it's to determine, I'm okay with putting this forward to the public hearings, right? Is the next thing.
Well, we'll do the initial project resolution at the board meeting Thursday, and then we'll schedule a public hearing after that.
So at what time will we notify the developer of what our projected pilot offer will be?
I'll send it to him today. I'll wait for Lyle to review the assessment, the value, the land assessment.
John has a question, I think.
John?
Yes, do you know, Paul, in terms of the state program, were they gonna value the battery storage similar to the solar generation?
And what came out of the state a year and a half ago, they left battery storage out of it. they were leaving that up to the local jurisdictions. If it's possible that could change based upon almost every project now is talking about battery storage, so. But no one knows what's coming out of the state. Just so you know, if you run this through the previous state calculator, it values out at about 1.3 million per project on a before battery storage and land.
Before the battery storage.
And like Justin said, that's a pretty big drop off from cost.
Yeah.
Well, once we go to public hearing, let's take the other side. Let's assume after this goes out to the developer, they want to have a discussion and saying that we've missed something in our assumptions as it relates to the cost benefit value of the battery storage. Are we able to amend this without a second public hearing?
No, I Justin, correct me, but I think when we do the public hearing, it's based on the benefits we're offering. So if we change the benefits, I think we have to review the hearing, correct, Justin?
The final CBA needs to be presented at the hearing. If there's a change, then you may need to go back to the hearing.
Okay.
So we might,
The won't necessarily undertake or endorse the calculation. It just needs to be presented to the public at the hearing itself. So I think we have time to refine this. There are some things that I would catch here, this is, being the lawyer guy or whatever, but it's just adding in all of the megawatts involved. The summary I have still says 3.5, it needs to be 6.35. We really need to take a look at the projected assessment, take into account both generation and storage. Get, I think, a reasonable assumption on acreage, the land value, incorporate that. And at the end of the day, the PDF summary that I have, the purpose of a CBA is to show the amount of savings generated under the pilot over the course of the term. That bottom line number should be reflected here somewhere. That's the entirety of the purpose of the public hearing is to say you're getting X dollars in mortgage tax, X dollars in sales tax, and this is your projected pilot savings. We need to just bottom out that figure somewhere here. So that's, we only have one of those obviously because we're just doing pilot. We just need to get that net savings. And just so in the background, and this is a bigger conversation for all IDA things, and it's mostly being done in the context of the prevailing wage calculation, which this is a funny one. Is this project under 5 megawatts and a combination of generation and storage over 5 megawatts going to make this a project? That's a real question we need to talk about. But in the context of any project, the prevailing wage, there's a bit of a debate going on, and I sit on one side of the argument, if you will. The concept of net present valuing pilot benefits, and I know MRB's model just makes the assumption that it should, but without a crystal ball and without a time machine, I don't know how you net present value of savings that you're accruing on an annual basis year over year. So that's a bigger picture question, but and discussion that we need to have. But with regard to just the format here, I think there's a couple things you need to adjust to include the generation, the land stuff, and include a cell somewhere that does a bottom line calculation of what are the total gross savings that.
So Justin, in terms of the rest of the state, there's a lot of solar systems in place already today. And how are other people valuing these, or are they struggling with this same issue with battery storage?
That's a good question. It's not, I haven't done them as commonly as generation, obviously. So I'm not sure how assessors are really tackling these things. I think Paul raises a good point that the assessment regime that is now kind of put on the bench doesn't seem to address storage. It really relates to generation. So I would say that assessors have a free hand to take a look at a proposed project and, on a cost basis or on an income basis and just look at it fairly. Whatever that means. If there's a rule of thumb that suggests that storage gets, 750,000 assessed value per megawatt, then so be it. I just don't know where that average might land.
I sent an email to the county assessor in Tompkins County, who's probably the most knowledgeable on this, to see if he has any idea what's going on. One, with the TRO on the valuation model, and also on what has he done on battery storage. Just try to get some feedback, but I haven't heard back from him yet. So on the prevailing wage rate, understanding whether or not this project is subject to that, is that something that's our concern, or is that primarily up to the developer to comply with that? Or do we have a responsibility ensuring that any project we induce meets those requirements?
Well, on the prevailing wage law, the liability is all on the developer, and quite whoever the owner is going to get hit with a wage assessment if there's a position taken by the Department of Labor. The law itself doesn't place affirmative obligations on the IDA other than to disclose that its financial assistance is part of what is called public funds. So you have, and we do that in the application. I think I don't know if we've updated the application to include prevailing wage stuff yet, but if we haven't, we should. We should just say, hey, applicant, this financial assistance counts as public funding. You may or may not be a covered entity. We have a checklist that developers and IDAs could use. Are you solar? Yes, no. Are you under 5 million? Yes, no. And then you're exempt. Congratulations. There's affordable housing exemptions, brownfield, things if you have a URI grant. There's different things where you can get completely out of the analysis. But if they do qualify as a covered entity and their total public funding exceeds 30% of their total project cost, inclusive of not only IDA, but also any state grants or any other public sources, they're covered. It's on them, but we just need to disclose.
Okay.
That's where making sure that your CBA has all of the information in it that it needs to disclose, including total benefits, total bottom line, grossed up. If it's a project that is a $3 million project and it's got $1.1 million in benefits, well, they're in. Well, it needs to be over 5, so do the math. So if it's a $5 million project and there's at least a third of that, pardon me, 30% of that, whether it's yours or the state's, then they need to prepare accordingly.
It just, that includes our benefit over the 15-year period of the pilot, correct? I mean, the total state.
Total pilot, it seems that the Department of Labor is including pilot benefits. Or statute that suggests that you don't include any projected public funding that is uncertain or unreasonably calculable at the time, which you can, with a straight face, I can say that a pilot, it's really hard. You don't have a crystal ball, but they're counting the pilot. And that's where you get taking a step further where, diluting it out with a net present value is a real convenient way to avoid 30%. But again, it's accrued. On year 3, they're not getting 1/3 or whatever net present of that value. They're getting the value. In year 9, they're getting that value. And part of that, and the other part of the argument or concern about using net present value, and let's just look at year 3 as an example. Before year 1, you did a calculation, or presumably did a calculation showing a pilot benefit and then laying a net present value calculation across it. But in year 3, you do your parish report. What's it going to say? It's going to say full taxes would be this, and this is what they paid, and this is their net benefit. There's no dilution.
Right.
Same thing in year 5, 9, 12, whatever. So I think EV is a slippery slope and it could be subject to challenge and put folks at risk. And again, the assumption and imposition by the state developer risk. It's their liability if there's a wage assessment. But at the same time, they're building their assumptions on your CBA. You're the only public document that exists in the ether, whether it's on your website or in the closing document we include within the agent agreement or else. In the Department of Labor, when they do a wage assessment, they're just looking for documents available to them. So we have not a lot of risk, but a lot of, I would say, I guess, obligation or responsibility to be as accurate as we can for the developer's benefit and for your own.
I have no further questions. Is there any other questions of staff or Justin? Rob, any questions?
No questions, good discussion.
So you're gonna talk to Roger Tibbetts
Yes.
today? Okay, so let us know and then we'll, adjust this.
I'll get a hold of National Grid and see if they can get us an explanation on how
Yeah,
that works.
yeah, I've been trying to get hold of Jerry for like 2 weeks on the application or what, by email and phone and not getting a response. So you can reach him with some, about, what that non-wires alternative means.
So do we need to modify what we did at the last committee to include this new schedule? So I'd entertain a motion for the new project summary and pilot payment estimations.
Yep, so we'll update that today, once we get both, or as soon as we get that figure information from Roger as far as the assessed value.
But do we need a motion and a second and on board action to change the pilot schedule to include the battery storage like we have?
I don't think so, because I think, because I think the battery storage is included as per megawatt capacity of a renewable energy project. So I don't think that's a change from any board policies.
Okay, but this will be included in our
Yeah.
Project inducement resolution on Thursday.
Yes. Yep.
Okay, so there's no further action necessary from us.
I don't think so. Justin, anything we need to do here legally?
At the end of it, I think staff is just going to update the board package for consideration on Thursday to reflect an updated CDA.
But as soon as we get this, so sorry.
Felt that when we put the final CBA into live, it needs to be available at the public hearing and on the website. That's what's really relevant. And when we circle back to the final project authorizing resolutions, reflective of the CBA that was on the table at the hearing itself.
Okay,
So, once we get this updated, we'll also send this to Nexam. So they can see it before the board meeting. So my guess, if there's going to be any negotiation, if they really balk and the board feels, there's some other considerations, I think you make that adjustment at the board meeting Thursday.
okay.
And then we adjust the CBA accordingly and put that out.
I would, if it's necessary or feasible, I guess, to have a conversation with them between now and Thursday, I would suggest not getting into a debate or a negotiation on the fly at the meeting Thursday. Let them know how the board sits on this and
You're suggesting that staff should have this discussion in advance of Thursday's meeting with Nexam?
yes, absolutely.
Okay.
I wouldn't want to sideswipe them if they think this is going to come as a big surprise.
Okay.
All right.
If there's no formal action necessary for the board, is there any more questions or a motion to adjourn?
I'm going to be waiting to hear from you, Paul, on the assessed value.
I'm sorry, John, we missed that question.
In terms of this spreadsheet, the dates now, this has to be updated to indicate both north and south on it. This one just calls out north, but then we go down to the standard solar, we called out 6.35 megawatt battery and solar.
Yeah, we'll be updating this to both the north and the south, yes.
Okay. Okay.
They're both the same capacity.
Yeah, there should be two standalone CBAs.
Yes.
Which,
When you update it for the board packet, we're either gonna put a better estimate of the per megawatt value, which is certainly north of 1 million, and then you'll also update the land, or
We'll update the land as well, once we,
Okay.
yeah,
So
we'll talk
we're
to the
gonna do-
local assessor, yes.
Where did the existing 1.493 million assessment come from? Was that still a proration from oil or is it some?
That was Lyle using the state, just using the state, formula as a reference, and Lyle, that didn't include
It's a
that,
discounted cash flow that the state came up with.
but that did not include the battery storage, right? That was just, we haven't updated.
They don't address battery
Right, yeah, so
storage
we-
as
Does
far
that
as I
include the
know.
adder?
They haven't told us what the community adder is. Remember, we asked.
That
and
makes a big difference.
It makes a
if
huge
we get that
difference.
information.
So a community adder, if you put, the other projects we've reviewed have had like a 2.25 penny, 0.0225 adder, and that almost doubles the assessment. So
Did they say that they haven't gotten the community adder yet, right? Should we have?
they said they were getting it, but I was still confused on how they represented that, whether they considered that part of the, see, there's a 21 cent in the formula. I don't have it. There's the National Grid. There's a load or demand reduction payment they get from Grid of like 21 cents a kilowatt hour. Okay. That's a payment because now Grid doesn't have to update their infrastructure so much. So that's a payment they get.
That's built into.
They show a total
Yeah.
community adder in here. They show a total sum for 297,780. They don't show it as a per megawatt.
My minutes last week, she answered it and said, yes, they applied and will get it. And she said something about 7 cents.
Yeah.
An additional
There was
7
7
cents, whatever that means.
Right.
Pretty big barrier. And if we're gonna have an interaction and a follow-up with NextAmp, I think the takeaway would be an absolute confirmation on the community adder.
Yeah.
And an understanding of how we might approach the proposed assessment of both generation and storage. They're pretty material.
No
factors.
question about it. That makes a huge difference in the projected value if the state model comes back as is. So.
Which we won't know about a year. Maybe they'll try to get it through next year's budget cycle or drop it in a budget bill. We don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is gonna be a tinkering on the right side or if they should just go back to the drawing board and
My understanding from one conversation I had is that the major complaint is they didn't follow the rulemaking. There's certain rulemaking procedures they had to go through and they failed to do that. And that's why the TRO. So it could be just they have to go back through the rulemaking process to get the existing model in. But David heard chatter that they were redoing it. Didn't you say that you heard rumors that they were changing the model to even make it more beneficial for
Yes.
the project?
That's what I heard that's going on.
So whether or not that requires legislation, who knows?
they're just gonna call it SAPA, the State Administrative Procedures Act, so that about regulations.
Yeah.
There's oftentimes either a 30 or a 90-day comment date and then adoption period. I mean, I think it's about 6 months, no matter what you do. So there's gonna be some time either way.
The community adder, that just applies to the generation though, right? Not the battery, right?
The model the state has only deals with generation, it doesn't deal with batteries, so. I mean, the bottom line comes, they know what they're gonna be receiving in projected revenues from the project.
They give us a
We're
total-
putting out a number that we expect them to cut us a check, the taxing jurisdictions a check for. So, trying to get to a good assessed value is to pump up the CVA so that it doesn't look as skewed as it is against cost. Is that accurate, Justin?
I think, again, the statute, I think, was generally written by the industry, so I think you can determine based upon the folks who hold up their sleeves to do it.
Yeah.
And that's me being somewhat tactful.
Understood. So,
But yeah, at the end of the day, I mean, if it's a reg issue and they screwed up a comment period and that's held up, that's one thing. If the TRO is more based on substance, that there is no discounted cash calculation and everyone's making it up, that's a whole different, color cloth. I guess we'll have to kind of take our cues from how the state tries to fix it.
Well, for the CBA, you put in the total for the community ad, right? You put in the total amount, or do you just put in the?
Whatever they put on the
This is what
application
you put in there.
goes in there. And that only affects the assessment. And that
Yeah.
carries forward to the cost benefit analysis.
All right,
if there's nothing else, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second? All in favor? Aye. Thank you, everyone.
Recording stopped.
Thank you. Talk to you guys soon.
see you, thanks, Justin.